Welcome to the Tank Podcast. In this week's episode, Andrew Kotting and John Rogers discuss Kotting's 1996 film Gallivant, a psychogeographic tour across the coastlines of Great Britain.
And maybe, we could start because, John is always incredibly enthusiastic and a real advocate of the film, and our lives kind of didn't kind of collide for quite a while after he saw the film in the film festival in Sydney. But one of those that, as a kindred spirit, they're out there, and one of the ideas that Ian has is that the angels of happenstance, provided you're proactive, they will bring you together, and that's kind of what happened with both John, myself, and Ian, and a whole kind of network of like-minded half-wits that orbit this thing that is, psychogeography is not really the right word. I don't think Ian and I are particularly, this is Sinclair that I'm talking about, comfortable about it, but I think John's probably the closest to a proper psychogeographer out of the three of us.
That's unbelievably flattering. What I always fall back on with that, Andrew, is that I think it was Guy Debord, who's one of the people most associated with the original term of psychogeography, said that it's a term with a pleasing vagueness. So that's how I think it can be applied to all sorts of things, and has been, like I think a lot of what Ian Sinclair in this country, obviously most people associate psychogeography with Ian Sinclair, and to see you two collaborating is amazing. And that in many ways, Ian's blend brought that kind of like hippie wisdom, if you like, the whole ley lines and earth mysteries and all sorts of other stuff, which was missing from the Debordian, the French kind of intellectual slant, which is very much about revolution, the revolution of everyday life, exploring the hidden articulations of the way that capital constrains the human spirit. But I think for it to be a popular, idea, it needed that little bit of entertainment value that Ian added to it.
I think it's true, and I think once I came on board, I was very much the kind of the buffoon or the Benny Hill character, the fool. And albeit, we were talking about this the other night, John, and this is Ian and I were also in conversation about our collaborations at the Kino Cinema down in St Leonard's on Sea. And I kind of programmed some snippets of films, and I started with my River Thames film called Jaunt. And when I was making that, the kind of brief was, it was commissioned from Compton Television. The film had to be exactly 4 minutes and 40 seconds. And I proposed that I would go up and down the River Thames, but on a bicycle, on foot, and on a pleasure cruiser. One of the guys that used to work out in a gym, Billy Old, was one of the pilots, and also a little kind of small vessel called Tigger. And I documented it at the time just using an old kind of DAT recorder and a Super 8 camera. And I kind of reverse engineered a structure to that 4 minutes and 40 seconds. But halfway through it, I also lived on the Pepys estate. I mentioned that earlier to you, Matteo. And Pepys, Samuel Pepys always had this kind of connection with the River Thames and the foreshore. In fact, where on the Pepys where I was, he had an office there. So that kind of featured very much in my meanderings and my kind of musings and my ramblings, which I then kind of cut up. But somebody suggested I read Downriver by Ian Sinclair. And I'm very honest about it. And I said, well, I didn't really get on with it. It was one of these books that was meandering a bit like the river. There was a narrative in there somewhere if you were hard enough to kind of dig it out and make sense of it. And it really put me off anything else Sinclairian. But the film did quite well, and off the back of that, I then got this commission to make Gallivant, where I circumnavigated the whole of the UK, starting off at Bexhill-on-Sea, at the Dollar Pavilion, blah, blah, blah. And that, we'll talk about that in a minute. This is just a kind of preamble to my connection with Ian. And I remember when the film came out, I was very anxious, the first feature film I'd ever made. It was playing in festivals, doing very well in festivals. But whenever I was with an audience, it really felt to me as if it was the work of a of a mad person, somebody that was genuinely unstable and berserk. And the only time the film kind of settled and started to feel as if it was comprehensible and managed was when Gladys and Eden came on stage, and they would talk, and other people would kind of join in these conversations. And when the film kind of then went to we got a release to cinema, and one of the critics suggested that it should have been drowned at birth like the runt of a litter. And I kind of thought that maybe it was a bit hard, but they'd certainly hit the post or the crossbar of my own problems I had with the film. And I had also moved down to the Pyrenees and was living down there on and off. And the producer of the film was forwarding lots of letters of praise and fan mail, in effect, as well as a copy of Sight and Sound. And this character, Ian Sinclair, had seen the film, I think saw the film twice, and was just so enthusiastic about it, so incredibly effusive and clever about his deconstructing and reconstructing and finding meaning in it that I felt was there intuitively. I had no script, I had reverse engineered a structure other than the journey itself. And maybe there was that I went back and reread almost that out of an honourable thing to do downriver, and kind of adored it. And it really changed my relationship with Ian's writing. And Lights Out for the Territory came out not so long after the film, and then I was informed by a friend, Gareth Evans, who is a close friend to both John and myself back in London, that Ian had this bolt hole down at St Leonards-on-Sea, and it coincided with my move from the Peaks Estate down here. And probably within 6 months, we met up and we started beating the bounds together. And I think Ian was always fascinated and impressed by the fact that I loved the open water swimming. I would go in swimming right in front of Marine Court, which is where he has his bolt hole, hidey hole, writing hole. And the relationship really grew out of that. And both of us wanted to go on these kind of journeys, these journey works that we call them, kind of endurance tests. Him of me and me of him in terms of company, me making sure he didn't trip over the curbs. But this was the spawning ground. This is where every walk we've ever been on together, and John has joined us on some of these walks, they were just kind of catalysts for more ideas, for more making. And that, I think, was something that the Angels of Happenstance bullying me into reading this book, which I couldn't get my head around at all until this kind of critique of my own film, my own kind of work. It enabled me to begin to understand how Ian works, and this connection, I think, has stood the test of time. And John now has kind of joined in many ways. I mean, John has his own amazing kind of projects, but we've walked and made work together now maybe half a dozen times, haven't we, John?
Yeah, at least it's been incredible for me. I mean, seeing Gallivant at the Sydney Film Festival in 1997, it had such a powerful impact because I'd been away from home, away from the UK for by that point, nearly 3 years, just under 3 years, and was interested in writing films and seeing Gallivant, but also I was doing bits of acting as well to try and enable that process of writing. And then seeing Gallivant in a program which I think was a program of travel logs, most of which were very formally essayistic. A lot of it was locked off, or it was just what you might call B-roll, or establishing shots with a narrated voiceover. And then Gallivant just had so many. It was a performance. I mean, that's the thing that's kind of astonishing about it. And you were on the road for 3 months? So it's a 3-month long performance, but then also has this incredible intergenerational relationship between Gladys and Eden at the centre of it that gives it a real heart and warmth and a real emotional connection you just don't find in those very formal essayistic films. There was literally nothing like it around. And then the very kind of almost handmade aesthetic of you shooting it on Super 8, which is a format at the time. I remember talking to projectionists a lot through the film festival, and they love it as an aesthetic, but it's they can't project it. And then
it's a nightmare to project, yeah.
It's a nightmare, and it gets blown up and it loses resolution when it gets blown. People say you can't work with it as a professional format. And here it is, and the jeopardy of you posting those envelopes of film off was so unbelievably romantic. it was. I don't think. That's why I think it's different to a lot of the other works that it's associated with. You know, you say it gets thrown in maybe with Lights Out for the Territory and Wakila's work, but it's very different. It's incredibly different, like I say, and has a level of depth and warmth, an element of punk about it as well. Andrew, I think there's a real punkish sort of kind of.
Yeah, that DIY aesthetic was always very important to me. And having grown up, in the kind of late 70s and being really influenced by punk, more the idea that you didn't need to be a musician to make music, you didn't need to be a filmmaker to make films, you certainly didn't need to be a writer to write. And all those things kind of informed my early kind of forays into being an artist, and a lot of those traits, a lot of those elements that were there, formative stage, I can articulate it now, 35 years later, it's kind of part of my job to do that. But intuitively, yeah, there was a large element of punk, the absurdist, the situationist that you've just kind of talked about, John. All those things kind of fed into it. But we need to make clear that the whole film wasn't actually all shot on Super 8. And in fact, it was a compromise that I had to make with the producers and the funders, the BFI and the lottery. And so a lot of it shot on Super 16 and then all blown up to 35mm at the end. And really invariably, when I was shooting the Super 16, that's when the film slows down and I'm kind of developing a relationship with the audience, with Gladys and Eden. And those two characters, they were I was cajoled into reconsidering, my punk aesthetic or my punk ambition, because I felt that the film should just, a bit like Jaunt, I'm down the River Thames, I go around the whole of the UK for just over 3.5 months, in fact, it took us. And through serendipity, I would meet people. I would target, whether it be lollipop ladies or lifeboatmen, whether it be people that were part of the Jack in the Green or the Bolster Giant down in St Agnes. And through those relationships, I could film them. And then all the soundtrack would be, or the voiceover would be separate. There would be no sync. And the BFI, I remember them saying, look, we need central characters. And one idea was that I might go with my old friend Sean Locke, the comedian, writer, and he might kind of be the he would be a central character, but it would just end up being a vehicle for him. And in the wake of Gallivant, maybe 5-10 years later, that's very common. It's a very common thing to do. You go off on a journey with a celebrity. I then came up with the idea that maybe Faye Weldon would review the rushes and she would narrate it after the event in the same way that Russell Hoban was somebody else I approached. And I remember the reaction from him. It was a Sunday morning. I just finished listening to the omnibus edition of The Archers. He goes, if you think that you're going to come back from 3 months of filming Super 8 and you give a rough cut and I have to respond to the material, you've got another thing coming. So that definitely a no from him. And over the phone, I remember kind of crashing. Oh dear. But again, through happenstance, serendipity, Gladys's husband, my grandfather Albert, had died when we were kind of prepping or preparing to kind of work on a treatment, which I'll talk about maybe in a while. But I then came up with the idea of Gladys and Eden, mainly because we were going over to see Gladys. I had a very crude high-8 camera, and I was documenting their kind of relationship as it was growing, because she was very intimidated by Eden's disability, the fact that she was pretty non-verbal, the fact that she was at very early stages of learning Makaton. And Gladys never really took prisoners. So she goes, what's all that bloody signing with your hands business? Come on, you can speak properly. And so Gladys would always bully and cajole Eden. And one Sunday afternoon, the gas fire was on. I think Songs of Praise was on. And they were playing imaginary tea parties. So Gladys was sitting there with serviettes and plastic knives and forks. Come on, we'll have a nice cup of tea. We'll have a tea party. And I remember just sending 4 minutes of that up to the BFI and saying, I think we found our two central characters. And almost in that moment, they were convinced, I was convinced. And that's when the foundations of what became Gallivant kind of landed. And also the other urgency was that Eden's Joubert syndrome, it's this neurological malady that she has. She was born without her vermis. And all of the information I could find, this is kind of pre-online, this is in the library when I was up at Senate House as a student doing an MA, it was pretty negative and life expectancy was really grim. And so from the minute Eden was born, I was looking to document our time together. And that resonates in the film in a way that I could never have anticipated. Their relationship in particular just grew so strong for me. And it took me maybe 10, 15 years, possibly after Gladys had died, to look back as a testament to their relationship, to my grandmother's idiosyncrasies, to her quirkiness, but more importantly, to those 3.5 months that we spent together, was just a joy. And, I would be eternally grateful if I'd never made another film, which at the time I thought I might never make another film, to the BFI and lottery funding, to have helped me to do that. That's something that still resonates for me today.
Andrew, do you think that sort of development that put Eden and Gladys at the core of your film sent your filmmaking on a different trajectory afterwards? That having made a film like that with that relationship at its centre, do you think that influenced your later work?
Yeah, weirdly, it kind of went on hold. But it's what I've been doing with Eden now for over 20 years is collaborating on various projects. But because Gallivant did so well, I was hijacked. My ego was hijacked as well, and I dabbled with narrative. I dabbled with working with a big budget and proper actors, and I was still, I guess, using my technique. I love improvisation. I love performance. I like serendipity and happenstance. But I think once I'd finished with This Filthy Earth and then ultimately Evil, the feature film that I shot in the French Pyrenees, I felt more comfortable, and it felt more truthful to be working on expanded home movies, really, and turning the gaze, the lens back in on my own life, and in particular Eden, because there's something about Eden that is unfathomable. And I think if you're living with somebody and you're a primary carer for somebody who's now 35, there's never a week that goes by that she's both infuriating and inspiring. And she's become my muse in many ways, not by design, but through circumstance. And to go back and maybe iterate again, one of the things that Ian Sinclair bangs on about is that he never really knows whether she's ventriloquizing me or whether I'm ventriloquizing her. So this conversation we're having today certainly wouldn't be happening if it hadn't been for Eden. And I'm set in a garden shed here inside a big old industrial unit, which still is full of mnemonics and paraphernalia that pertain to her glorious life, which is continuing at a pace. So yes, John, I think without knowing at the time, I was sowing the seeds and also the confidence to turn the gaze back in on my own life and to work with both family, but in a performative context, in the great out of doors, because that tends to be my canvas. I love to go out into the world and perform. But now, of course, I'm performing with Eden. When we made Gallivant, there was a weird performance between the three of us, Gladys, Eden and myself.
I think that's great. I think you got the other thing as well. I mean, we've spoken about this, and somebody asked me recently about how Gallivant fits into the time that it was released, but also the bigger picture of, for want of a better word, artist film or experimental film. And I feel like I'm trying to explain that, like, you're not the kind of character that would end up making that kind of film today, if that kind of film could be made, because, you've got this background as a painter and decorator. I remember you telling me the fantastic story of the strap nights at the film critic's house. I can't remember his name. He used to do film. What was it, sorry?
He was called Philip Jenkinson.
Philip Jenkinson, yeah. And then that development and going through art school at a time when art schools were probably a lot more accessible than they are today due to, funding, grants and things like that. And your background as a performance artist as well. So a number of things kind of coincide to make you quite a unique character. Can you just sort of explain a little bit about that development from painting and decorating and all the characters you would have met through to like experimental performance art and making films?
Yeah, that trajectory was quite strange. I think because I took some time out. I did a foundation quite quickly after I'd finished school. And then I ended up in Scandinavia for over a year, living in Finland and then Sweden. And I was really curious. I'd got a job in a lumber yard and then a factory. And then I came back and I was always very self-sufficient. I think it was the working class lad in me rebelling against a kind of middle class upbringing. And so I'd set up a window cleaning round when I was 12, and then I moved into painting and decorating. It's mainly my mum and dad's friends in and around Elmstead Woods, a reasonably affluent area. But I found that, owning cash was a great way of funding whatever it is I wanted to do. So out of that grew kind of confidence, also meeting complete strangers. If I was up painting somebody's house, and some guy was like, "Excuse me, mate, can you come around and give me a price?" So at a very early age, I was doing that. And then John Penfold, who I was living in an old property in Lee Green, and his dad was, very much of a Romany stock, and he was one of my closest friends. And he had an old van which he'd borrowed, and we'd go out scrap metal digging. So ostensibly in and around Rotherhithe, Surrey Docks, which is now Surrey Kids, we'd just break into old buildings and nick all the Bakelite and the brass rods, sometimes carpet, any leads, on the roof, whatever. And again, there was something that would give you the confidence to just give everything was up for grabs. It was all a bit of a laugh. And I think when I then went back into art school, by that age I was kind of 24, so slightly older than some of the other BA students. And I had my own place to live. It was, peppercorn rent. I was kind of squatting at the same time. And so that self-sufficiency, but also not wanting to be tarred with the same kind of art student-y brush. So I was always fighting against that, rebelling against that. And so my earlier performances, I started documenting them on Super 8. Again, one of my clients had an old Super 8 camera. So she said, "I'll take it." And the lens was hanging off, and I just wanted to document some performances I was doing. And Layla, by this time, we'd fallen into bed together, November the 16th, 1982. Remember it clearly. She had a leaky goldfish, and the bed was very wet, and I thought, "Oh, she's keen." And then I realised it was the goldfish tank at the end of the bed. Anyhow, it sustained itself, this relationship, documenting performances on Super 8, attending these kind of venues where there were generators. And I remember I'd made a film which was quite explicit. In fact, it involved a lot of nudity and Layla pretending to menstruate onto the back of Jesus Christ. And the audience lapped it up. And then I was bullied at the end because a whole kind of gang of miscreants had missed it. So they made me project it onto my T-shirt, and they stood there, and I said, "You're not going to wank to this, are you?" And they didn't. They didn't. There was no circle jerking or anything like that. But those encounters, and that, as John was suggesting, there was a real underground. Things were really beginning to happen. Bands like Test Department, Vic and Bob Mortimer, breeding in and around Deptford, and you could do anything. Everything was possible. And maybe because we hadn't gone digital at that stage, we were still analog, and there was something very alchemical about Super 8, about the processing, about the projection, about the fact that the materiality of the actual kind of celluloid became important. So the scratches and my incompetence, the fact that I would quite often underexpose it. It was just get a camera, go out there, get a recorder, record something. It didn't need to be in sync, and let's see what happens. We can reverse engineer a structure at the end of the event, and that is in many ways is my methodology today.
Wow. And when did you move to the coast before you made Gallivant, or after?
No, long time afterwards.
Long time. So what's but you had a relationship with Bexhill, didn't you, that goes back to your child? It wasn't just an accident that you start the journey in Gallivant at Bexhill.
No, Bexhill was always so important to me. I mean, I lost my virginity to Hastings Beach. I thought it was an 26-year-old Italian language student, but I was way east of the mark. And so, in hindsight, she thought it was hilarious that I'd orgasmed so quickly. I mean, I was only 16, so I've got youth on my side and enthusiasm. But I was down on the south coast, and I was camping in Gladys and Albert. Used to have a tent initially on a campsite, and then they upgraded to a small caravan. So from probably when I was about 14 onwards, we would always go down there and spend our summer holidays. Bexhill-on-Sea, well, Little Common, just inland. And at the time, that's when the Dulawar Pavilion, which was very much, a kind of iconic hub for old age pensioners, actually. And Gladys would go, "Oh, we'll go and have a nice cup of tea. We'll go down the pavilion. That'll be the bloody day out. Come on, Albert." And so we'd all bundle into the car with their dog, a dishevelled kind of poodle. We'd turn up at the Dulawar Pavilion, and it really all you had was a brass bands, lukewarm cups of tea, Bakewell tart, and Knickerbocker glories. But there was something wonderfully anachronistic and warm and fizzy about everything about that building. I mean, they got a big grant. It was in maybe 20 years ago, 2000 or something, changed drastically. The ladification of Bexhill-on-Sea has really come on at a pace. And the ladyfiers with their Pilates and their nice coffees have really transformed it. But at the time, Gladys, salt of the earth, you go there, it's what she used to describe it as, it's London's bloody holiday camp. Well, that's why we'll be going down there, Andrew. Come on. And it resonated. It became somewhere for me really important. And I knew that if I sat on those deck chairs outside the building, I mean, hilariously, once we got back down to start filming Gallivant, she goes, I don't bloody recognise the place. You know, and you could buy a nice sandwich. You could buy wrap. She goes, where's the bloody warm stuff? Where's the Knickerbocker glories? So she wasn't happy with the transformation. But sitting on the deck chairs, and she goes, even the bandstands aren't the bloody same. And she started a conversation with Eden immediately, without any prompting. She goes, when your daddy was a little boy, we used to bring him down here. So, and I was full of nerves and apprehension and anxiety, thinking, is this going to work? How are we going to sustain this? But in that kind of first 10, 15 minutes, it just I knew that something was going to come of this. And that was down to the Dullah War Pavilion, Bexhill, and she shared her memories, both, you know, on screen and off screen. And it became the kind of glue for the film, but also the glue for our relationship to keep it going. You know, there was a robustness to it, because I knew that every evening we could just sit and she'd give her a few whiskies. And she would come out with these amazing stories like, there's things, Andrew, about the other side of the family that I will never tell you. For instance, she hated my other grandmother. My other grandmother was born in India, now Pakistan. She'd married a German between the wars. Bloody Nazis grabbing all the... my daughter, why she ever married your father, I don't know. So there are these anecdotes and this spirit of her, which was raging. And you see it, it's palpable throughout the film. And that relationship just grew and grew. And it was very sad. You know, when we finished, 3.5 months later, we were back at the Dullah War Pavilion. It was kind of winter, early winter. They're wrapped up in their coats, and Gladys kind of to camera, unprompted, goes, I want her to come home and live with me. And she puts her hand around Eden. And it was very moving. It was just such a brilliant moment, both at the beginning when we set off and when we came back, and whatever happened in between. You know, I kind of filmed it, but it took us months to get all the rushes back and start trying to make sense of it.
Yeah. And did how much of the road trip did Eden and Gladys go on? Because I imagine they weren't in the camper van with you and the fellas, right?
No, they didn't. I mean, as you're right. You know, I never really. I didn't want to explain that. I wanted to keep it ambiguous. But in effect, yeah, 4 blokes in a camper van for 3.5 months, and then Gladys and Eden invariably they would spend 10 days, and then they'd go back to London. And in fact, it was really important that Eden's education was continued. And so Layla would take her back, and then they would rejoin us. I mean, I think Layla bore the brunt of Gladys can be pretty hard work. So then there would be another 10 days, sometimes 2 weeks, and then they'd come back and join us in Wales, and then they came back, and then they joined us again back up on the east coast, and then came back, and then so on and so forth. So I think in total they made 6 trips over the 3.5 months. And then when they were with us, it would normally be for anywhere between a week and 10 days. This is pre-Airbnb, so we'd just find some place that we'd rent, and then we'd all bundle in there so we could have proper baths and showers and so on. So that's logistically how the thing was kind of choreographed.
And you did the road trip as a singular trip in the van. Yeah. You didn't break it up for production purposes.
Unbroken, yeah, completely in one hit. And really, we tried to, wherever possible, up on the kind of the northwest coast of Scotland became more difficult. You know, we got to Fort William, and we wanted to be faithful, so we were always trying to find every single A road, B road, or track, so we could turn around and say we had circumnavigated the whole of the UK, the coastline. But of course, that wasn't really possible all the time. But we avoided big cities as well. I mean, that's one of the kind of rules. Otherwise, I knew that we would just get bogged down in a city. You know, some place like Manchester or Liverpool, we were just going to be stuck there. So we tended to kind of drive through those places. Either at night or not stop. We made a point of not stopping in the bigger places. Glasgow we could have been there for, probably got killed in Glasgow.
Well, I think what I was going to talk to you about is about your interactions with people, because that's really one of the other beautiful aspects of this film, and they're quite unique, and that's consistent with a lot of your other films as well. as well. These kind of accidental, because that's not arranged, is it? You are literally just going up to people.
In Gallivant, 80% of them weren't arranged, but there were a couple, and I was using the AA Book of Coastal Britain as my Bible. People go, this is a pre-internet, pre-being able to Google. I've done some research. I mean, I've made various other films, a couple of short films, one called Anvil Head the Hun, which is very much a kind of portrait of some of the standing stones, some of the places, prehistoric sites in and around UK. But this AA Book of Coastal Britain, it would always flag up a few things en route, like Goonhilly Downs and the fact that Land's End, Penzance. It said there was a little thing that came up about the St Agnes Bolster Giant. It was only a couple of paragraphs. So what we tended to do, I would go into tourist information places and ask, about that. Or Yanni, who is the production manager, she was based back in London. And we had this big kind of Bakelite mobile phone, which invariably never had a signal. And so she would phone up and you'd take number 7. And in the end, she'd send a fax somewhere. And it would say, there's somebody that might be interested in talking to you that, is involved with the Bolster Giant. And the guy at Horse Sands, he was a friend of somebody's, and he was a mine about Horse Sands and these disappearing villages on the, edgeland. So we had a couple of people that were keen to be interviewed, but in a way I wanted it all to be happenstantial. And so that's that it wasn't a rule. That's just what happened.
Wow. And then you constructed it. Obviously, the journey. The great thing with journeys is they have a beginning, middle, and end. So your structure, narrative structure, in a lot of ways, is decided for you the minute you set off. But then within that, were you kind of reverse engineering a lot of it? How much research did you do in advance about where you wanted to go, points you wanted to hit, places you wanted to see?
Well, I made a point of not doing too much research, and I think almost intuitively, I didn't want it to be an academic exercise. And weirdly, one of the reasons that I think that we got the funding is Patrick Keeley's film London had come out the year before. But when we were doing Gallivant, I think he just started work on Robinson in Space. So I didn't want it to be an academic. I wanted it to be a celebration of place and landscape and people and the relationship between Gladys and but the reverse engineering did come back afterwards. So I was then finessing and researching a little bit more in the edit suite, or when I was cutting it, and so I wanted to get some of those things a little bit more kind of in order. And it also meant that some stuff I would jettison in the edit. That at the time when some of the conversations just weren't working, some of those encounters weren't working. But it also enabled me to find a bit of archive, whether it's Sonic archive or we picked up the young girl the other night. She was fantastic picking up on why did I use the footage of cowboys and Indians, when we were at the Mumbles. And those kind of moments just enable you to kind of create another layer. So it's more than just the journey. And that certainly has affected the way I've been making work over the last 20, 25 years, really. I think Gallivant proved to me that, this process of reverse engineering or bringing in other material and in particular art, you've got a kind of another voice, like a meta voice, something that is bigger than the journey itself. And that's something that
Sorry. It sounds massively important to you, isn't it? Because I think the way you use sound is unique still to this day. I think even though you've been around for long enough to have influenced enough people, no one seems to be able to crack it in the way that you do. Did that come about with Gallivant, or was that something you're already using? Not just the way you collage and archive sound, but the way you take part in the composition of the music as well, don't you? The soundscapes.
Yeah. Well, I've always been really lucky. David Burnham, who is he was one of my neighbours in Lee Green. He was in a band called Wang Chung, Dance All Days, blah blah. And he then was teaching at the Royal College, and he was teaching. No, in fact, he was at Goldsmiths. That's what he was at Goldsmiths, and then he went on to the Royal College. But he was a musician. I mean, and somebody like Jem Finer, who I collaborate with a lot now, they're just incredibly generous about providing music that they're happy, or they allow me to then cut and paste and run backwards and treat and sample the music that they're generating. And so that enables me to create atmosphere. And I think one of the things that I talk a lot about in terms of my soundscaping or the collaging, it's about atmosphere. It's about how a film can feel. And I always use it the kind of dub reggae metaphor. I've always been a big fan of dub reggae, which to me is about atmosphere. The less lyrics, the better. In fact, a lot of reggae is just they're protest songs, and they're songs about activism and Rastafarianism. But dub doesn't. You're left this kind of smidgens or trace elements, and they sit above, on, and underneath the bass lines and the drumming and the rhythm. And if you think of bands like Burial, if you think of there are just too many, Augustus Pablo and Tricky. I mean, it's those atmospheres that he was creating when he first came onto the scene, and so that's what I'm really drawn to that. So I'm bringing sound elements, whether it be voices, interviews, samples, and then letting them to kind of find a place, and quite often they're in dialogue with the images, and invariably they're leading into the next edit, rather than traditionally, you edit a picture and then you lock off and then you apply the music and so on. So as a result, it's sound and image I pay them both the same amount of kind of respect, rather than it being biased towards image. And that's really, if there's any kind of recipe for the nonsense that I'm up to, it's the fact that I'm as considered with the sound as I'm the image.
And it was interesting to look at your body of work, particularly like your features. Seems like after Gallivant, you did a couple more, for want of a better word, more traditional narrative films with This Filthy Earth and Ivor. But then you've returned to the travelogue, the eccentric knockabout travelogue. Explain that process to me. Did you get fed up with the whole scripted thing?
Not so much, but it's funding. I think in the end, it was the process of, when you're buying into it. I mean, there's something about the industry of filmmaking amazing. There's some brilliant practitioners out there, and amazing work that's made. But invariably, the script, the idea, the concept, the actors, the actresses, it's a military operation from beginning to end. And I didn't have the patience. And I think because of my relationship with Layla and Eden, and me being away from home on those, when we did This Filthy Earth, we were up in, Yorkshire for the best part of 3 months. It was too difficult for my relationship to sustain itself with Layla and Eden. And Eden was just chaotic and bereft and angry when I'm not around. That was the issue. And then eventually when I made Yvonne in the French Pyrenees, or in France, I was gone for over a year, and that was almost, the end of our kind of relationship, because Eden was just unbelievably belligerent about everything. And so I realized that there are more important things than making films. So I began to weave her more and more into the journey works. And of course, by then I kind of hooked up with Ian. And as you know, he's incorrigible. So there's never a week that goes by without some other kind of project kind of fomenting itself, and then off we go. So I always felt, I think, artistically and intellectually really satisfied with the kind of way in which the work was moving, and it became a lot more organic and less dependent on budgets and crews. But what I learned having made those two is that when you work with actors and actresses, and good actors and actresses, how brilliant they are, and how they can really infect, affect, and affect what your preconceived idea of ambition of what this thing can be. And I loved that about Filthy Earth and Ivor, what they brought to the mix.
And one thing I'm always fascinated, Andrew, because you've got like quite a substantial body of work now. When you, throughout that period of time and now, are you aware of where each piece fits into that body of work? When you're planning a next project, are you going, hang on a moment, where is this in the relationship to Ivor or Gallivant? Or do you just instinctively follow the next step?
Oh, that'll do. Yeah. There's no plan. I'm not too precious about the oeuvre and making sure the oeuvre is comprehensive, or that it's about time that I made a piece of work about. No, and I use the word spillage a lot. So quite often when I'm working on one thing, already the germ of an idea of something else is happening, or there are elements within one project that are underused or have opened up a can of potential. and I know that I would have to go back and revisit it. So quite often, thematically, things reappear. So yeah, it's a body of work which is very much alive, and just coming up with the idea of journey works. I've made 3 or 4 big pieces of work with Ian that fit into that kind of genre, if indeed you could call it that. But no, it's always changing. And the project I'm working on at the moment with Eden, I would never have imagined that I would be a high-end VR project, digital, using CGI, incorporating elements of performance and installation into this. And that's something that I think, because I haven't become hijacked or bogged down in the ambition to make feature films, it's meant that here I am, 40 years down my timeline as a practitioner, being involved with something that I could never have preempted or imagined. Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. What did it feel like 25 years? Because Gallivant being celebrated in 25 years.
John, any idea what the time is? For some reason,
yeah, it's nearly 1. It's 5 to 1. So I think we should.
It's just that.
That would be good.
I was about to at 1 o'clock. Eden's coming here, so it'll all change. I've got to meet one of her helpers because she goes to the toilet at the studio.
Should we wrap it? We should wrap with this final thing about the 25 years, or do you feel like you got enough?
Is there anything that you want to cover that you'd like to cover? I mean, what would you like to be the cum shot, for instance?
That's interesting.
Oh my lord! I don't. Yeah,
like
well,
it.
It's going to be flamed up because we would never have talked about that.
Yeah. The intricacies of Kodachrome. We could talk about the aesthetic of Super 8 if you want, Mateo, and then leave that to a wrap up.
We can bang on about. Well, your last question, John. So you were talking about, was it 25 years? Have we covered that?
Yeah, 25 years. I mean, what did that feel like? Because I don't know if when you made Gallivant, when you make a work, you think in 25 years the BFI are going to celebrate this as a 25th anniversary. How did that feel? Was that a really gratifying moment, sobering?
Yeah, it was. I was pushing this idea the year before. I wanted to make a Gallivant 2. We were going to go the opposite way round. We were going to take Layla's mum with us, i.e. my mother-in-law, who's pretty outspoken as well, and very interesting character. And for COVID hit, so that kind of evaporated. But the BFI were really supportive, and I went up to the NFT, and we did. There was a kind of weekend's worth of programmation, and maybe 150, 200 people turned up for the screening of Gallivant, and looking out at old faces, commissioners from the BFI, editors, the cinematographer, families, and in a way, people I work with then become part of the family. John, for instance, you've become part of the expanded kind of Kotting family, because it just gives me the confidence, and it's more important for me to work with friends and family than it is to work with professionals. And that celebration up at the South Bank was just a bit overwhelming for me. I got very emotional towards the end of the day, thinking that it lives on, and it still features in top best British road movies or experimental films, and that kind of legacy I could never have preempted, and I'm very proud of. But more importantly, though, Kodachrome and the grading of the film. I mean, I barely slept in the post-production. I was thinking, how am I going to bring these disparate elements together with a palette which is going to be satisfying to a future generation of tank viewers? And so this has preoccupied me, and I wrote a kind of 15,000 word dissertation about it recently. But all I could come up with is the fact that I wanted to colour it. Not that we spent a lot of time, because we didn't have a lot of budget. There was this when I made Smart Alec, a short film with Sean Locke, dear close friend who died sadly 2 years ago. We wanted the Smart Alec, the short film, to look as if it was maybe shot in the 70s. And Gallivant was shot on celluloid, and Smart Alec was shot on celluloid. And the way of doing this, the labs, they could grade this, that, and the other, but it was a process called bleach bypass. So you bypass the bleach, and therefore all those beautiful, vibrant colours that you would get in Kodachrome, the Super 8 that we're using, or the Super 16 stock, it's almost as there's a mutedness. It's suddenly the colours are muted, which added to this, and then you blow it to 35mm, it then starts looking as if it might be archival. It might have been shot, earlier than the 90s, which is when we shot it. So I just hope that the Tank viewers are satisfied with that as an answer, because it's something that has really, it's stuck with me. It's really, I hope that that's an explanation that they'll be happy with, given that it's a very stylish style magazine.
We certainly are.
I'm hoping to. This VR project that I'm talking about, Matteo. I don't know if I send you the link, whether you could, maybe promote it, and also certainly a link to John. I mean, John has hundreds of thousands of viewers for his YouTube site, but it's going off until it starts in Folkestone at the Folkestone Dockfest on Friday this week, well Thursday this week opens. And it'll tour around. It's going up to Glasgow, Manchester, and down to Farnham. And I'm hoping to have an in-conversation with John to commission him to another one. Probably, I think it's in January, John, down in Farnham at the John Hastings. So, but the idea with that, Matteo, is to kind of factor in my early kind of relationships with Eden. There's early works that I made, then Gallivant, and then coming out the other side into this. So yeah, I'm hoping to have another conversation which would be slightly more Eden centric rather than Gallivant centric next year, but there's nothing coming up that I can think of. Great. I mean, and yeah, I'd really like if you can give it any kind of promotion, because it will really help. And the tour, I'll give you the tour date. So I'll give you a bit of promo. There's some, if you go to my Instagram, there's little kind of memes I'm sending out there. And the premise of the project really is that there's a Pyrenean farmhouse that I've talked about that we bought 35 years ago, just after Eden was born, when I graduated from the Slade, and it's become like a memory hovel vessel. And so you put on the headset and you go into this place, and it's full of Eden's drawings, sound bites from various films. It's full of bits of Gallivant, Gladys, and so for 12 minutes, you're kind of between the two worlds of the Pyrenean farmhouse, which is as I said, a memory hovel or cabin, and you're back in the UK, wherever you are in the gallery space. And the gallery, the installation is full of artifacts that have come from the house, including the original Gallivant poster, which was completely annihilated because of the mildew and the rot, the general rot. I mean, the house is kind of very dilapidated and falling down, but I managed to preserve the Gallivant, the original Gallivant poster. So things like that are festooned in the house.
It was a holiday to me. I never even washed a cup of saucer. The food was given to me. I said even the whiskey was given to me. I've enjoyed going with you, and I enjoy every minute with you. Look, I can't be no more grateful at my age, because you've all been kind to me. It doesn't matter what you say. They say, oh, we're only paying you back what you did when they was growing up. But we've enjoyed every minute of it. Enjoyed every minute with Eden, because I don't see her much, do I?
To hear more podcasts from Tank, you can subscribe on all major podcast platforms or follow us on SoundCloud. The theme music for this podcast is by Himera.